Hey everyone, and welcome back to Pulp Hero Audio. Today I'm going to be talking about the Robert E. Howard Conan story, Red Nails. And I'm going to be presenting sort of my thesis, my idea that this story is inspired, at least in part, and has some allegorical things going on related to World War I. Now, I'm no great Howard scholar or anything. I'm just a passionate amateur fan, shouting into the maelstrom that is YouTube. I certainly haven't read every academic work related to Howard's writing. So, this idea that somehow Red Nails is related to World War I, maybe there are some that are thinking, of course, everybody knows that. Or maybe some are thinking, your theory is stupid, man, and you are stupid. But whatever, here goes nothing. So Red Nails was published from July to October of 1936 in Weird Tales magazine. Now, this would have been nearly 17 years since the end of World War I, or the Great War, as it would have been known as then, since there hadn't yet been World War II. So Robert E. Howard would have been a boy of impressionable age, only 13 years old, when the Great War, when World War I ended. Meaning he would have been too young to have fought in the Great War. But, there's no doubt in my mind that, something as monumental as World War I would have made its way into his consciousness, and indeed the consciousness of the entire country and the world, for that matter. So, as we look at Red Nails, we find that Conan and a female warrior companion by the name of Valyria stumble across this ancient and lost city called Zucatl. And they find that two factions within the city are nearing the end of a great war that has lasted for years, in which Conan and Valyria find themselves embroiled. Now, the setting, the characters, the names, and things like that in this story are certainly reminiscent of Mesoamerica. The prince of one of the factions is even named Olmec, after all. But I still think that a great deal of the plot and some of the phrases and things that the characters say mirrors, or is at least very reminiscent of World War I. Now, Conan and Valyria discover that this war, once there had been many factions in this war, but over the years, it has been reduced to two. You've got the Tecuhtli, with whom our heroes ally themselves, and you've got the Xotalankas, their enemy. Now, at this point, this war has lasted for years, and it's never left the confines of this city. And as Howard writes, he says, "It filled their whole lives. They were born in it, and they expected to die in it. They never left the barricaded castle except to steal forth into the halls of silence that lay between the opposing fortresses, to slay or be slain. It was a ghastly, unreal nightmare existence these people lived, shut off from the rest of the world, caught together like rabid rats in the same trap, butchering one another through the years. So, this city and this war are these people's entire world. Okay? So, Howard, to me, could have been just as easily been describing the world, particularly Europe, during the time of World War I. Because, these people, these two factions, after all, are of the same people originally, of the same, stock, if you will. And, what really is the difference among a German or a Frenchman or an Englishman, if you go back far enough, into ancestry? Because, that's what World War I was. It primarily pitted European against European, many of whom probably shared in a common ancestry of some sort, just like our two factions in Red Nails. Because in Red Nails, one of the factions, the Tekutli, they even occupy specifically the western part of the city, with their enemy, the Zotalankas, advancing from the east. Now, this certainly brings to my mind the whole idea of, Western Europe, the West, or the Western Front, as we famously think of during the World War. And, of course, what lies between them, what lies between our two fighting forces, is this vast battleground that Howard calls the Halls of Silence. Now, listen as Prince Olmec in Red Nails describes the Halls of Silence. He says, "The central part of the city was left bare and uninhabited. Those empty halls and chambers became a battleground and a region of brooding terror." Okay, you might see where I'm going with this, and I think this will bring it home, because most telling of all is the words used by the Tekutli warrior Tukatl, when he says, "The halls and chambers between Tekutli and Zotalank are a disputed region, owned by no man." In other words, it's a no man's land. Okay? Now, this seems to me pretty strong evidence of Howard alluding to the trench warfare situation with no man's land between the two forces fighting in World War I. Okay? So, to me, that was a pretty big one for me. Now, another kind of poignant moment to me in this story is when Howard takes the time to give us a conversation between two of the warriors, two of the soldiers, if you will, fighting this war. And they're discussing the possibility of life beyond the war. One warrior says, "But afterward, after we have slain them all, will it not seem strange to have no foes to fight? All my life I have fought and hated the Zotalankas. With the feud ended, what is left?" Then it says of the other warrior he's talking to, Zatmek, says, "Zatmek shrugged his shoulders. His thoughts had never gone beyond the destruction of their foes. They could not go beyond that." Now, that conversation could have easily been similar to one between two World War I soldiers whose lives had been consumed by a war that, to their point of view, had no hope, or seemed like it had no hope of ever ending. Now, granted, you could probably apply that to a lot of wars, okay? But to me, this reminds me of certain passages in the World War I historical novel All Quiet on the Western Front. And it makes me wonder, could Howard have read, or did Howard read, All Quiet on the Western Front? After all, it was published in 1929. There was an Oscar-winning film made of it in 1930. So it is certainly possible, very possible, that R.E.H. had read the book, that he had, or seen the movie, or even both. And what influence or inspiration that might have been, who could say? Now, another point I want to make in sort of making my point here is the weapons used by the warriors. Now, in addition to the standard weapons of the Hyborian age, your swords and knives and things like that, we see that in this war, they have some new and rather devastating powers, weaponry at their disposal. There's what is called the Burning Skull. You've got the Pipes of Madness. Their use of the Black Lotus. The description of the tendrils of smoke coming forth off of Tascala's black altar as she works her magics, her life and youth-stealing magics. You've got the devastating wand wielded by Tolkemec. And then you've got the giant snake called, interestingly, the Crawler, used by one side as well. Now, to me, it's not very hard to equate these supernatural magical weapons to the devastating weapons of modern war that was introduced in World War I. Everything from your machine guns to your poison gas, think your Black Lotus, the smoke coming off the altar and what was going on there. Tanks crawling, remember the Crawler? Tanks crawling across no man's land. Or the German U-boats, submarines beneath the waters, kind of like the subterranean horrors in the city's catacombs. Or even the dragons out in the forest blockading any kind of escape from this place, from this war. So even there with the weapons, I think we could see kind of metaphors for the modern devastating power of the weapons of World War I. And then even when the war is over, the survivors, the victors, the winners, they seem to suffer from what is often described in the story as a madness. There's a crazed look to them, a madness that is part of them, as they are simply unable to return to a life of any kind of normalcy. Now, considering the time in which Robert E. Howard lived, I think he would have been, familiar with the concept of the shell-shocked, to use the parlance of the time, the shell-shocked soldier, and the mental toll that years of war and bloodshed could bring upon a soldier like that. So, in all this, where do our heroes, where do Conan and Valyria fit into all of this? Well, Conan and Valyria, they're outsiders who come to this war rather late in the game. One way or another, this war is approaching its bitter end, or perhaps it's just going to linger on, year after year until both sides are dead. when suddenly Conan and Valyria arrive, and that changes everything. That turns the tide. In other words, I'm saying Conan and Valyria are the United States entering World War I. Because just like Conan and Valyria, the US of A was a bit late to join the Allies in the war effort. And by the time the Americans joined up, by that time, much of Europe was already in ruins, with staggering losses on both sides after years of fighting and destruction. But it was the American forces that brought a freshness, a vitality to the war effort that ended up turning the tide for the Allies, just as Conan and Valyria did for the Tukutli languishing on their western front. And I think it's kind of appropriate that, Robert E. Howard, an American writer, a Texan, that Conan would represent America, the United States, in this great war. So, there you have it, guys. My little theory that consciously or subconsciously, red nails served as Robert E. Howard's allegory of World War I. Huh? I don't know. You guys out there, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree? Did I hit the red nail on the head? Or am I just reading a lot more into it than what is actually there? Am I as mad as the people of Zucatl with my crazy theories? I'd love to know your thoughts, but whatever those thoughts may be, please like or subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate that, and I'll talk to you soon. Later.